Welcome to Segment Smarter with What Customers Tell You, part of the Tag to Nurture series by Elevar. I am Matt Barr, the co-founder and CEO of Fairing. A little bit of kind of backstory and overview of what Fairing is. So we are a post-purchase survey provider. We work with about 2,500 Shopify Plus brands. The core use case of Fairing is attribution, so it's understanding where your customers come from. We'll get into some of the other use cases that are actually end up being a little bit more valuable with what we're going to talk about today, which is around the idea of order tagging and kind of de-siloing your survey data. As far as where Fairing lives, we live pretty exclusively on thank you and order status pages right in that moment of purchase. So when you're asking these types of questions, we definitely recommend asking them when you have your customer's attention, not via email after the fact. You're going to get a lot more response data by doing so and a lot more accurate data. So jumping into it, I'd be remiss if we didn't just start with a quick overview. So what Fairing does is we capture what Nielsen has labeled as zero-party data. And to frame zero-party data, we're actually going to start with first-party data. So first-party data is data that you capture of what your users are doing. So this might be page visits, email opens, kind of the actions that those users are doing. That's all of your first-party data. It's really important as a brand marketer that you kind of have a lot of this data because you own it. You're not paying for it. You're not licensing it like third-party data. It is essentially becomes an asset within your organization. Switching over to zero-party data. So zero-party data is somewhat similar to first-party data. It is coming from your customers, but it's not observational data. It's data that your customers proactively give you. And it's in the form of form fills, of surveys, of quizzes, anything where the customer is saying and giving you a very particular piece of information. The submission, like clicking the form submit button, that's more your first-party data. And the actual value of the survey or the form is that zero-party data. Zero-party data is a fairly new term. It was created about 5 years ago. Again, Nielsen coined it. It's very analogous to first-party data. But the real reason why it came about was due to privacy regulations and everything that was pushing kind of pressure from the third-party data sources down to that first and just more owned data sources. So definitely think of zero-party data as a key input into a lot of what you're doing as a brand marketer. And the more of it that you have, it can actually become a competitive advantage. You arguably know your customers better than, let's say, competitors who might not be implementing a zero-party data strategy. So moving on to just some example questions. So this is Fairing's template library in our app. And these are questions that are really helpful on that thank you page. So after someone purchases, we typically group these into 4 categories. So we have attribution, again, our bread and butter, our focus. How do we get you better measurement data to help allocate those media channels more efficiently? The next one is just personalization. So this is one we're going to talk about in depth on the rest of this webinar. Net Promoter Score, it's kind of in a category of its own, NPS surveys. General research, hypergraphic and demographic type data, and then CRO type questions. The CRO questions end up honestly being one of the more valuable use cases of post-purchase surveys, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. And I guess the one thing to mention about Fairing and any other post-purchase survey tool is you don't necessarily have to just ask one question. I think there's some brand marketers that don't want to annoy their consumers with asking multiple questions. What we recommend is kind of starting with 2 to 4, just to get a taste of like, hey, how are my customers answering these questions? How are they engaging with this? What is my response rate? And then you can enable and disable questions to kind of solve different business goals. It's like, hey, we got enough CRO data this month. Hey, let's turn that off and let's get some more data about kind of the age of our customers. Is that changing since the last time we ran this? How do we think of this as a more dynamic strategy versus the historical surveying strategy, which is, hey, we're going to send this via a blast email once a quarter. We can't change it kind of mid-flight. We need to spend a lot of time making sure these questions are going to be perfect because we only get one chance. When you have post-purchase surveys that live in moment, it's a little bit more real time, which allows you to kind of turn and adjust those levers a bit more frequently. So jumping into tagging. So this is one of the most kind of underutilized ways to use survey data. So your zero-party data should not live in a silo. If we think about your first-party data, like page views and that type of data, you might want to look at that in the aggregate sense, but it's not going to be telling you too much. It's going to be telling you like a number, a quantity. When we look at your zero-party data, this could be data like this question, like which of these best describes you, that allows you to put your customers into different personas. It ends up being such a high leverage data point, and a lot of marketers end up asking these post-purchase surveys. They just use Fairing's dashboard, which is a great way to get started, but it's too siloed. You're not using this across your existing MarTech kind of stack. So that's really where order tags come in. Fairing has about 25 integrations, so you could do it that way as well. A lot of our integrations are very analogous to an order tag. It's essentially a key value pair that's living on another platform. But you want to think about, how do I de-silo all of my survey data? So the way that we do this, outside of, like, again, a lot of these we have native integrations, but at Fairing, we rely pretty heavily on Shopify Flow for the Shopify order tagging and customer tagging and any of the integrations that we don't have. For the ones we do have, like our Meta integration, our Cappy integration with TikTok and Meta, our Klaviyo, we have native integrations, but for anything else, we're going to use Shopify Flow. And we're going to make sure that right when we turn these questions on, all of that zero-party data is flowing throughout the whole ecosystem. So step one, set up your question stream, which is Fairing's version of questions. Step two, make sure your integrations are live and make sure Shopify Flow is enabled and you have the right setup for tagging orders and tagging customers. One thing to note, just to kind of double click on this Shopify data point, is my opinion within the Shopify space is Shopify really wants as much data to go into Shopify as humanly possible. And right now, they haven't built a lot of products to let you action on that. But what we're seeing with their analytics enhancements and what they're doing with ShopQL, which now allows you to build reports based on tags, having all of this in Shopify from the get-go, I believe is going to be a huge leverage point for brand marketers that know how to unlock this. So we think about analysis, all these external BI platforms. I think a lot of that eventually is going to move to Shopify, and the core of that is going to be getting the data from your existing tools, Klaviyo, for example, Fairing, et cetera, in Shopify to allow you to not have to leave the platform to run more complex kind of joins and analysis across your data sets. So just a kind of thing to end with, why it's important to do this now, because I do think you're going to have some improved operating leverage in the future. Just jumping into one of our specific integrations. So on this previous slide, we shared this right here, which is our Klaviyo integration. But to share a very specific use case here, we're asking this question, which of these best describes you? This is probably my favorite personalization question. It's a little bit more difficult in kind of the fashion verticals where maybe those personas aren't as consumer identifying. In this example, the question was, are you a student, are you a hobbyist, or are you a professional? So really easy for that consumer to opt in. And what we're doing is we're piping that data to Klaviyo. So to take a step back, we have this in Fairing. We know, hey, AOVs with professional is higher than hobbyists, but lower than students. It's like, so how should we, like, what we should be trying to do is capture more of those high AOV customers, and then our AOV will rise in the aggregate. So that's kind of what we could do in Fairing. We could trend this over time. We could compare it to age and gender questions and how did you hear about us and all that fun stuff. But the next question is, like, how do we act on this in an ongoing fashion? And that's where this integration, we're piping this data to Klaviyo, comes into play. And so we have this trigger, somebody places an order, we're looking to see how they answered this question, and now we have this personalized flow that's talking to students, it's talking to hobbyists, and it's talking to professionals in a much more personalized manner. So students, they might not have as big as a budget, or maybe they're not maybe professionals are buying this for a work setting. So there's a lot of different things we can learn here by just asking this question and then personalizing this to improve the value in outcomes that we're getting in our CRM strategy. So this is just a quick example. I'm going to run through a few more. Analogous to this one is which of what's your favorite thing about our product? So we have healthy options here. So it's like, hey, this customer cares about having healthy options versus the convenient packaging. So these are just basic questions. This can also help inform a product strategy, but if we're thinking about how to use this data downstream, it's capturing this data and then personalized experiences for those customers based on their preferences. The next one here is CRO. So again, this is probably the most underutilized question that people should be asking, and you don't even need to have this on all the time. This one was, how can we improve your shopping experience? The example we give here is couldn't find the return policy. So we're asking buyers, so they were able to get through, but this is a really good opportunity to capture this type of data. You take the output of these survey questions and then just go create a checklist. It's like, okay, our return policy was hard to find. How do we make that more easier to find? So just a really easy feedback loop. You're going to get a lot of information around filtering, around merchandising, around coupon codes not working. And maybe you have coupon codes that were deleted or they have limits or something that that's probably preventing other buyers. The add to cart button didn't work on Firefox. I feel like that's one that we see quite often. So really good feedback loop to capture data and then go act on it immediately after. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't share an attribution question. So the whole idea here is, hey, you're looking at your measurement tools, whether in an aggregated fashion in another tool that's click-based or on platforms. And by asking customers, you're getting way more clarity at the top of the funnel to then improve the allocation of that media. So in this example, we're using kind of direct, this unknown is, hey, where are all these customers coming from? I'm not getting any exposure into them. These numbers aren't adding up. It's like, hey, let's just ask customers. And hey, we find out that podcast is actually really working. It's just that nobody is using those promo codes to help kind of connect the dots with the podcast. So as far as use cases, we kind of went through the CRO use case, we went through the personalization use case. The ones with the biggest impact, there's two sides to look at this. One of them is like, how do we improve personalization that is easy, effective, and always on? So from a budget perspective, asking a question post-purchase, syncing that to Postscript or your SMS platform and your ESP, Klaviyo, for example, and then personalizing those messages to improve the ROI of every campaign is a really low budget, high impact way to get value out of your post-purchase survey data. On the creative side, we could ask questions around personas, around what resonated, around channels that really help you lock in the creative. So there's a lot of use cases here, but the places that I would start are what are questions that I could feed to a comms platform, let's say an ESP or an SMS platform, that allow me to turn this always on flow to a more evergreen one. Another question would be, who is this order for? That's probably if you do a lot of gift giving. Hey, let's solve this user buyer problem. If we're talking to gift givers, let's talk to them as gift givers, not, hey, can you review the product that, let's say, you just gifted to someone. So just some best practices here. So again, we always lead with attribution. That your marketing spend is most likely the biggest line item in your P&L. We should be trying to endlessly optimize for that line item. And that's why we always recommend starting with some version of an attribution question. It's going to give you a lot of insight into that top of the funnel, which is arguably where the majority of your media is being allocated. The next thing would be to tag orders. So using Shopify Flow, turn on all your fairing integrations that are applicable, and do this from day one. Having that order data in there is going to ultimately be super valuable, whether that's from the minute you integrate or, hey, 3 months from now, hey, we have a use case or we have an idea we want to go look. We want to go look at some data in ShopQL, which again, I think is going to be a big opportunity for merchants. Having that order there is going to pay dividends long-term. This same one is just enabling integrations. This could kind of be compounded where it's like, don't just sync data to Klaviyo. Let's set up some flows. Let's set up some automated systems. Let's send fairing data to Meta through the CAPI integration, and let's build some reports in Meta to understand the difference between the conversion pixel and the survey data. And let's start to build the foundation for that. So again, just to highlight some of the use cases here, we have attribution, which we mentioned here. We have personalization, sending that data to Klaviyo. There's probably an opportunity to personalize the site. I think no one is doing a really good job doing that with zero-party data yet. I'm personally super excited about customer accounts within the Shopify space. I think that's a really cool opportunity to do that. The next one is just customer research, demographic, psychographic type data. And then the last one is CRO questions. So how was your shopping experience? We have a whole suite of them in our template library, but definitely recommend adding a CRO question. So the next one is, what should you avoid asking in your first post-purchase survey? So I would start simple. So again, I would start with 2 to 4 questions. Unless you've done this before, you know exactly what questions you want to ask. I would think of questions that allow you to create kind of actionable output with them. So we have our, and to start, if we're thinking of 4, it's like, let's just choose one from each of Fairing's core use cases. So we have an attribution question. We have a persona personalization question. We have a research question, and then we have that CRO question. I think that's a really good place to start. You don't want to add 10 questions and then you end up not looking at the data because you were kind of just willy-nilly adding a bunch of questions post-purchase, and your consumer didn't necessarily need to answer them because you're not going to end up doing anything with them. So that's what I would recommend. I mentioned this before. I still would recommend leading with an attribution question. The data that we've seen, the reliability of that data is much higher than I think a lot of marketers think. Like, your customers actually does a really good job of remembering how they discovered your brand. So definitely leading with that. And that's really just the corollary with your P&L. Like, your biggest spend is on marketing. Let's make sure that we can measure that in the most effective way possible. And then the last thing here is really looking into the data. So we're talking about automation. This whole thing is about how do we capture questions post-purchase? How do we use those in flows? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention just like analyzing this data, whether it's in Fairing or piping it to Klaviyo or Shopify or another platform where you can really start to kind of join the survey data with the other data sources. Like, this is where a lot of the alpha is going to come. So I'm asking my personalization question. I'm piping it to Klaviyo, but also, like, are those customers buying different products too? And let's dive into those things and kind of analyze this in a more collective fashion. Yep. So how do you launch your first How Did You Hear About Us post-purchase survey? Super simple. You can go to app.fairing.co. We have a 14-day trial. There's other solutions out there. You could test all those as well. If attribution is the core problem you're trying to solve, I would definitely take a deeper look into Fairing. We have a data science team. Our sole focus is capturing you better attribution survey data. But as far as getting live, don't overestimate what it's going to take. If you're a Shopify merchant, you download the app, you add the app blocks, you add a question from the library, and you're live. I have a video on YouTube where it takes me less than 60 seconds from download to asking questions. So really, really quick and simple to start capturing data, all in these specific trials. So just wrapping up, again, create a free account at app.fairing.co. You could also find us in the App Store if you prefer that avenue. We have a 14-day trial. No questions asked. Start asking questions and collect some data. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email us at partnerships@fairing.co. We also have live chat in the app if you have any specific Fairing-related questions. And don't hesitate. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk strategy and how to implement these specific tactics. So don't hesitate. Thank you so much.